As much as we all love Resident Evil, it's had its fair share of missteps over the years. I mean, with over 20 years of history under its belt, it can't be all perfect all of the time. Now and then, over those 2 decades, there have been moments that were just shy of something great that, for whatever reason, didn't quite live up to what was set out before them. Today we're going to be looking at just a few of those slip-ups. My name is Sai, and this is 5 times the Resident Evil series wasted its potential. The downfall of Umbrella. Okay, let's get the obvious one out of the way. Resident Evil 2 ends with...
It's up to us to take out Umbrella.
Resident Evil 3 ends with...
Are you ready to finish this?
That's it. Umbrella's going down.
Resident Evil Code Veronica ends with...
Yeah, it's payback time. We've got to destroy Umbrella. Now, let's finish this once and for all.
And Resident Evil 4 begins with...
Soon its stock prices crashed, and for all intents and purposes, Umbrella was finished.
That's right, 3 games that concluded with characters promising that they would take down Umbrella, and in the end the company dissolves due to the stock market before players can make their next move. Resident Evil 4 was always designed as a moment to take a left turn for the series, but abandoning the overall story arc thus far in order to have a mostly clean slate for new players, whilst making some sense from a business perspective, really bit Capcom on the backside. Not only did it let the air out of what was amping up to be an immense showdown, it also created many more issues in the ensuing years as Resident Evil's ongoing story tried to recapture the corporate terror that Umbrella represented and fill that void. Be that retreading old ground in games like Operation Raccoon City or Remake 2, or introducing replacement companies from Tricell to those even more on the nose such as Neo Umbrella. The original red and white logo is still synonymous with the series, despite the fact that one opening cutscene essentially cut it out of the franchise. Sheva kills Wesker. Resident Evil 5 is a very divisive game, but if there's one thing that I would hope most people can agree with is that it did the right thing by returning to a core story thread and seeing it through to the end. Chris vs Wesker began in Resident Evil, amped way up in Code Veronica, and saw its close at the conclusion of RE5. Now, we're not here to debate the death of Albert, but there's one minor detail that felt a little wasteful. Wesker dies at the hands of Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar. Sheva was a fantastic character and truly belonged in Resident Evil 5's campaign. She served to give players an inside look into the current state of the world and Chris's history since Code Veronica, who returned to the franchise now as a founding member of the BSAA, a force that would go on to shape the series from here. She offered insight into the global scene that the biohazard arms race had taken, and heck, it's just always nice to have new characters, right? Even if they do disappear in a puff of smoke afterwards most of the time. However, it does seem a little of a wasted opportunity for a game that features the duo of Resident Evil protagonists not to actually have them deal the final blow together. After all, both Chris and Jill were betrayed by their former captain, who at this point has become a superpowered megalomaniac intent on destroying the planet. Furthermore, Jill spends most of the game under Wesker's control. Wouldn't it have been so much more satisfying for her to get her vengeance? Instead, Chris and Sheva fire rockets from a helicopter, whilst Jill just kind of hangs out. Sure, it's a minor thing, but for the final moment of the Wesker storyline to overlook Miss Valentine just seems, well, wasteful. Too many one-shot villains. As of summer 2019, Resident Evil 5 turned a decade old, and this also marked 10 years since the death of Wesker. Now, again, the decision to kill off the character is still a hotly debated topic, and I don't need to get into whether or not it was a good idea in this video, but instead we should definitely address the fallout of that moment. The titles that followed Resident Evil 5 would in some way all have something in common, and that is struggling with their antagonists. Of course, it would be difficult to create something that would live up to the legacy of Captain Wesker, but it almost feels as though Capcom didn't even want to try. Revelations Veltro are completely self-contained, and the game's sequel had real potential when it capitalised on the Alex Wesker hint left in Resident Evil 5's DLC, but the game ends with her apparent death. RE6 had a handful of new enemies, most noticeably Derek Simmons, who's built up to be so important that he gets retroactively inserted into the Raccoon City incident, and he doesn't even make it beyond the halfway point of Leon's campaign before mutating. Side games like the Chronicles titles and the CGI movies all feature their own one-off bad guy or gal that either meet their fate at the end of the title or are never and will likely never be mentioned again. It's hard to argue that establishing an ongoing threat with a major antagonist behind it would help the state of the series, instead of 10 years of self-contained stories with a barely sewn together arcing plot that has really muddied where Resident Evil can go from here. Just let one bad guy survive and go on to cause some havoc. Just once. Scrapped enemy designs. Resident Evil is a series with a lot of stuff that's hit the cutting room floor over the years, be that entire game concepts or just simple enemy designs. While some of these are hard to imagine exactly how they'd fit, some are the kind of thing you'd be happy to see make their triumphant debut after being thrown aside earlier down the line. Exhibit A, RE2's Man Spider. Lickers are iconic, but an earlier version of the creature, literally half human and half arachnid, is the stuff of scuttling nightmare, not to be confused with Exhibit B, RE0's Spider-Man, that would have latched onto victims' backs, sunk their fangs in and controlled their bodies like a puppeteer. Exhibit C, also from this title, Wesker's Monster, a strange monkey-like BOW that would have been the exclusive creatures slash bodyguards slash pets of Wesker, the origins of which are still a mystery. Exhibit D, Hookman, a design so striking that one of RE4's early builds is still named after it by fans. Is he a ghost, or merely just a hallucination? Exhibit E, this entire page of concept art that can be unlocked in Resident Evil 2 2019, which features a half-licker, half-man thing, a zombie in a wheelchair, and whatever the hell this thing called the Condemned was meant to be. Early Resident Evil 3 concepts. As most people will know, Resident Evil 4 went through many iterations before it arrived in stores, the aforementioned Hookman, the Fog version, etc. Many of these early demos are still pined for by fans as a what could have been, but there's always been another discarded project that's interested me more. We all know that the Resident Evil 3 that we got is great, but it was never intended to be the third numbered game. According to an interview Project Umbrella conducted with Kawamura, scenario writer for Biohazard 3, the game was a sequel to the fourth Survivor side game from RE2. It starred Hunk in the leading role as he attempted to secure another sample of the G-Virus that, we can assume, had fallen out of Umbrella's hands. Interesting to note that this background character was at one time considered as the next protagonist, and would be playing as an Umbrella operative for the first time, and in a numbered title no less. It would also mark the first time Resi took to the high seas, as the game was set on a cruise ship, an idea that would later be reused for Dead Aim and, a bajillion other entries in the series too. It was also set to feature plant-enthused zombies, which we can only assume was returned to when it was time to draft up scenarios for the Outbreak games. Unlike previous betas for RE4, which if we had gotten them instead of what we did would have affected the whole franchise, what's so mysterious about this RE3 beta is that it could still fit into canon. It wasn't so much replaced as it was just outright dropped. Resident Evil's development was drowning in new projects, and with the PlayStation in its twilight years, Capcom wanted to move on, opting to name a certain side game that was in production as Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and start development over for the next game for the next generation of consoles. Those were just a few examples of times where the Resi franchise dropped the ball. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below, as well as suggesting some other times where Capcom squandered a great opportunity. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with the podcast and other future video content, including the second installment of this video, and as always, have a good week.